I remember when I first started my business in late 2005, I was in my one-bedroom apartment. I was hustling every day, and it wasn't very long before I looked over at the VoIP phone, if you remember those, the Vonage phone that was sitting on my desk. I was picking up the phone and calling people every day, and I thought to myself, I could do this from anywhere. I could take this phone and I could go down and I could work from a beach in the Caribbean. I could go and work from Europe. I could travel the world. And it took me a little bit of time before I actually started doing that, before I actually took advantage of that. Now, we call that a perpetual traveler or a digital nomad. Millions of people have decided to quit their jobs or do remote work or just open up their location-independent business and be able to work from anywhere. But the question that gets asked so often all over the internet is, how do I pay tax as a digital nomad? How do I pay tax if I have no fixed home? And the reality is that things have changed a lot since 2005 and even since the last 1, 2, 3 years. We're going to talk about the Nomad Tax Trap and how to avoid it in this video. Hi, I'm Andrew Henderson, and I think that the biggest source of confusion that people deal with when they're figuring out where do I pay tax is figuring out where's their actual tax home. Now, this is a situation like so many offshore tax situations where U.S. citizens are in one bucket and everyone else is in another bucket. If you're a U.S. citizen, you actually have an advantage here in that you can take the foreign earned income exclusion, the physical presence test. If you're spending 330 days out of every 365 in a foreign country or countries, if you're on foreign soil, then that's your tax home. Your tax home is wherever you may be. And as long as you are not getting into someone else's tax net, then you can claim the foreign earned income exclusion in the United States. Doesn't mean that you're going to pay zero tax. There are lots of other things involved. But you can actually still be nomadic. But what about the Australians, the Canadians, the Brits, the New Zealanders, people from everywhere else in the world that has a residential form of taxation? The question is, where is your tax home? And what people have done, I remember sitting at a boardroom in the Shangri-La Hotel a couple years ago with people who had flown in from all around the world to meet with our team. And one of the big things people were talking about was, hey, as long as you spend fewer than 183 days a year in, let's say, Australia, they won't tax you. That's a big misconception that a lot of people are getting confused by, because what happens is you become a digital nomad. You go and you travel around the world and you say, you spend 8 months a year going to other places, going from country to country to country, from hotel to hotel, from Airbnb to Airbnb, and then you come back to Australia for 4 months. The reality is that while every situation is different, if you're spending 4 months in Australia, and if you're spending 2 weeks in 16 other countries, your case isn't as strong as you may think. This idea that the government simply says, well, hey, as long as you spend 182 days or less in your home country, you're off the hook, is a fallacy, because different countries have different tests. Australia, for example, there are 4 tests, of which the days test, how many days did you spend in the country, is just 1. Now, if I go to Australia and I'm a bona fide visitor, I'm just hanging out, I'm a tourist, then the days test may be the most important test for me. If I spend fewer than the requisite number of days, I'm probably going to be in pretty good shape as long as my intentions are clear, that I'm not trying to move to Australia. But if you've grown up in Australia and you are presumed to be residing there, if your domicile is presumed to be there, if you are contributing to a super, those are all things that could influence the government saying you're actually a tax resident of here. And this is what has changed. Not so much the law has changed, but as there's been more of these cases, interpretation of the law has been more common. And now in these common law countries, we have rulings that are saying, oh, you had a boat slip in Australia, and that to us indicates that you're planning on coming back, so actually you are a tax resident. This idea that you're just going to bounce all around the world, you're going to bounce from place to place, and then just come in and out of your home country as often as you want without establishing any clear ties somewhere else is really not going to work. Now, if you want to travel all around the world and you spend almost no time in your home country, maybe you're better off then. Again, this is not tax advice because every situation is so different, especially every country. But in general, you want to have some place where you call home. I increasingly think that having a base is important, not only because a lot of the 6- and 7-figure entrepreneurs that I talk to and that I work with are telling me that the base helps them have greater productivity. They have a place to store their clothes. They have a place to get work done. They're not constantly going from one Airbnb to the next. The base is important for productivity and operational reasons, but it's also important increasingly because people want to know, where do you live? Where do you pay tax? Now, just because you are liable to pay tax somewhere doesn't mean that you actually do pay any tax. Maybe the rate is 0. Maybe you're exempt from paying tax because of certain conditions, because your income's offshore, for example. But having a base is increasingly important. Having an apartment. Maybe you buy an apartment. Maybe the apartment helps you get the residence permit. Maybe the residence permit helps you get a citizenship. There's lots of different things that can play off of one another here. But having a base and being able to say, here's where I live, and then traveling from that base, being nomadic from that base, and then coming back, and then going to your home country, and then coming back, and then doing some travel. That makes a lot more sense. What you don't want to be doing is just some person who says, I don't live anywhere. Banks don't like that. Governments don't like that. And with stepped up enforcement, you don't want to be falling into this trap that all they count and all they care about is days. Because in 2019 and beyond, that's just no longer the case. Because here's the potential penalty. And I've seen this in several different cases where people think, oh, we were spending time in Bali. What can they possibly do to us? Well, number one, if you spend more than 6 months in Indonesia, just as an example, Indonesia is going to want to tax you. So the idea of staying out of Australia and just spending all of your time in Bali and then coming back that's just not going to work. But the penalties are that you keep your ties to your home country. You keep a bank account. You keep money coming into that bank account. You keep your apartment or your home. You keep those trappings of, hey, I still live here. And the government's going to say, yeah, you do still live here. Keeping all of your stuff in order and just leaving the country isn't going to work. And so the possible consequence is that after you think you've earned 2 or 3 years of tax-free income because you're just bouncing around and shouldn't owe anything to anybody, your government might say, hey, can you tell us where you were living, right? And if you can't show where you were living, if they deem you to still be tax resident, if you don't have a proper determination based on having the ties somewhere else, then they can come back and say, yeah, those years actually weren't tax-free. Please pay us. I don't want you to get into that situation. So make sure you create your holistic offshore plan, both for your personal tax, your business's tax, where you're living, where your banking is, what you're doing in your home country to make sure that you're not there anymore. Don't fall into the nomad tax trap.
I'm Andrew Henderson, and if you're looking for a way to legally reduce your taxes, build your freedom, and create wealth faster as a global citizen, then you've come to the right place. I want you to do 3 things right now. Number 1, click the button to subscribe to our channel. Make sure to get notifications so you never miss a new video. Number 2, get a copy of our #1 best-selling book, Nomad Capitalist, on Amazon and learn all the dozens of benefits of our lifestyle. And number 3, if you're already a 6- or 7-figure entrepreneur and you want to put these strategies in place, go to nomadcapitalist.com and find out how to get some help.